Hi everyone, we've been talking recently about vendor management offices or a VMO and building a VMO, why you need a VMO, what are the best archetypes and operating models to consider for a VMO, and also now we're going to go through what are the typical responsibilities for a vendor manager or the various role types that work within a vendor management office.
Vendor Ops, leveling up your vendor management.
So you may remember from the last video where we spoke about the role types that there are in a vendor management office, and we consider it to be 4, and this is how you can scale the operation out. Being a head of vendor management office, there then being a senior vendor manager or a few senior vendor managers, depending on the size and scale of the operation. Then the mainstay of the team will be made up with experienced vendor managers, and then maybe some more junior types and associate vendor managers. So at a high level, the focus of these vendor managers comes into the following bullets essentially. Their role will represent an expert in the vendor management capability. And what they'll look to do is operate as an internal consultancy. You may remember we spoke about hybrid mixture of a both centralized and decentralized operating model, like a hybrid coordinated model, where they'll operate as an internal consultancy capacity to ensure that the business units or the business areas in any diverse organization manages their vendors in line with a standard best practice vendor management methodology. In this case, we prefer vendor ops as the methodology that you'd look to use. This includes continued development and optimization of all processes that the vendor management capability uses, so the VMO uses and deploys across the function. Any of the tools that are in place, setting the standards for using those tools, what those tools will be used for, the hygiene factors around that, reporting, etc., what good looks like, what is not to be considered to be good, and corrective action taken where necessary, and essentially be the capability and the go-to SMEs that underpin the vendor management function, or in this case the VMO, working and coordinated effort with the rest of the business. So that's the high-level focus for these roles. In terms of what are the skills that we typically see or want to see for these vendor managers, so they have to be really strong and very proactive in communication. There's so much communication between the business, meeting their wants and needs, and sort of talking to the supplier to make sure that they've got that capability that you're looking for, and also that they've got clarity of task on what the business is asking them to do. Demonstrate problem solving. There will be problems. It's part of the reason why a lot of roles exist in a company. Nothing is automated, nothing is plain sailing, nothing is without problems. Even on a day-to-day basis, we'd like to think so, but in that case, there wouldn't be a lot of people working in these companies. So demonstrate problem-solving thinking and the concept of a relationship between a buyer and a supplier. Really strong stakeholder management skills, understand the personalities that are at play, understand what both sides need, and then mediate between them to make sure that those things are being fulfilled in equal measure on both sides. There's nothing worse than having an imbalanced or an unbalanced relationship where for a period of time that the buyer organisation, you may be getting everything you want out of the supplier and thinking, yeah, we've got the supplier, we've got that out of them again and that out of them. There will become a time, if you're being too draining on that supplier, then they'll potentially, whatever the contract says, be reticent to engage with you because you're sucking all the value out of it. It needs to be balanced. Demonstrate a structured, repeatable approach to KPIs, so establishing key performance indicators against all the processes that are in place, looking how to measure them, looking what good looks like and what that means and how to report on it. And then the ability, if you're a more senior vendor manager, so one of the more senior architect types, you're looking at how you improve those KPIs over time. Really good awareness around contract and service design, not only what a contract looks like, what a good contract looks like, and what good contract clauses look like, but also how to design services to understand a service design principle, things like ITIL play into this, etc. And also playing on from the ITIL piece, a continual service improvement mindset, always looking to optimise the process, the arrangement, the organisation, the relationship, the contract, looking at improving it on a day-to-day, week-to-week and month-to-month basis. So they're the skill sets that we think each role requires. In terms of the expected levels of experience needed, obviously there's 4 role types here. We'd say if you want to be not the head of vendor management, I think you probably need a bit more than this, but any of those roles, from an associate vendor manager to a vendor manager to a senior vendor manager, anything from 1 to 5 years experience in a vendor management or equivalent role. 2 years managing other vendor managers. If you're going for the senior VM position, or you're the head of role, you've at least got a couple of years in managing others in a similar capability and capacity and mindset as you. 2 years process design or architecture experience if you're a senior VM. So look for people who've got a business architecture mindset, have built processes end to end, in some cases complex processes that extend the boundary of just their team, that go from business unit to business unit with the relevant handoffs, inputs and outputs and touch points. You'll find on the YouTube channel a policy and process toolkit builder video that I've done and a download that helps you design processes with a business architecture mindset. So look out on the channel for that and go and download that. It will help you understand what I mean by these 2 years of process design or architecture experience. Ideal, nice to have awareness of SIPs in the UK, so the Chartered Institute of Procurement and Supply, ITIL within an IT sense, so the ITIL frameworks, ISOs help, like the British Standard, international standards, or equivalent qualification where possible. The experience of managing a service or managing to a life cycle, so onboarding, in-life, special measures, issues occurring, exit, offboarding, all that, understand the stages within a contract management. Understand the basics of risk management is really helpful. So, like I said, there'll always be issues, there'll always be something, but from the front of a relationship at the beginning, part of that due diligence and onboarding is to find out what are the key risks that we need to be looking for, what might crystallise and what indicates that they're going to crystallise, and putting in the key controls and the key risk indicators, similar to the KPIs that will inform you when something's going a bit awry. And then overall, good understanding of service outsourcing and complex arrangements. So the more, especially for the senior VMs, to demonstrate that they've worked on some really complex, large, multi-year, multi-million pound deals, lots of moving parts that are combinations of platforms and service, to really get your confidence that they can come in and do the job that you need them to do. So moving on from that, ideally experience of using some kind of digital platform. The only way you will scale this function and keep everyone consistently on the same guide rails, using the processes or deploying the processes, etc., and meeting the KPIs, is to enable yourself in the digital capacity. There is no way that this will scale across especially large enterprises without those guide rails represented in a digital platform. So have an experience of understanding of managing and using platforms. Anyone with experience with CRM platforms, working with things like development, ticketing systems like the ITIL systems. Some of the development systems are akin to what you'd looked for in a vendor management perspective to deploy them out. And finally, we come on to what are the typical roles and responsibilities for a vendor manager. So what we'd expect them to do? Well, manage global vendor relationships with an aim to ensure that the negotiated value is maintained, right? So to make sure that what has been contractually committed to is maintained and sustainable across the business. Look at where they can, of course, lead process development aimed at quality and consistency and reduce costs where possible. So looking at what are the processes needed from a vendor perspective or vendor management perspective, and look at improving the quality and the consistencies of them, and then measuring them with KPIs, KRIs and KCIs, as I mentioned earlier. Look at the supply place to promote and achieve continuous improvement. So I mentioned that again, making sure those processes are being continually improved. Look at achieving and adding valuable outcomes to the organisation. So communicating performance with stakeholders. What does performance look like? Are they performing? Are vendors performing or not? Are the buying organisation performing? So is the vendor doing everything you're contractually committed to? But in equal measure, is the company that you're going to be working for doing their side of the deal to make sure that those outcomes are recognised? Sometimes, and more often than not, it's the internal organisation that isn't ready to stand up to their half of their obligations contractually, more often than the suppliers, we find in many cases. Attending and chairing cross-functional meetings, so looking at where there's a regular cadence of team meetings required, ensuring that the vendor management plays their part, that the buyer plays their part. And you might notice actually where I've put support stroke lead, so it depends on the seniority of the role you're going for, be it an associate vendor manager or senior vendor manager. You might want to change it from lead if they are a senior vendor manager, or support if they're more associate vendor manager that you're looking for. So in this case, in this bullet, help build out the vendor management strategy and policies, providing training and mentoring to all stakeholders in the business that need to use those processes or are part of those processes. Look at how you would determine the portfolio of business critical vendors and suppliers, sort of tier one vendors, where you can seek opportunity with them to drive innovation, joint account planning, etc., and where you can extract more value from the relationship. In some cases, interacting including up to sort of CXO level, so any C-level representative or sponsor that there is on the contract or the program. Be present and part of any audit that's taking place, be it internal or external, audits of the vendor management space or the contracts that are being delivered by suppliers that are part of the scope of an audit. Experience in that is great as well, having experience of being audited or being an auditor. Look at managing governance of key vendor relationships, especially if you're in a regulated organisation. The regulation will stipulate certain activities that need to be done on a periodic basis. You need to be able to demonstrate that they're taking place and that governance is in place and being carried out. Manage and monitor the vendor performance against agreed SLAs and KPIs. That includes up to any failure to deliver, any credits that are due and credit reclaims. Sometimes these are so complex you need a platform or at least some kind of calculation method to work out what you're owed and when, and make sure that they're executed upon and you get those credits back. Act as a key point for escalation against any failing relationships, be able to spot failing relationships, create remediation plans, special measures to be able to improve the service, be it fault of the supplier or the buyer organisation of any side of it. If the value is not being recognised, some kind of remediation activity and special measures plan, return to green, whatever your company calls it, needs to be put in place and acted upon accordingly. And then ultimately manage contract renewals and the governance process on performance, risk and commercials. So there's a number of frameworks you can put in place to use that it looks at the things that have been said before, effectively identifying improvements, looking at regular management information, how to proactively manage poor vendor performance, effective dispute resolution. So if there's a dispute or an issue, how to capture that and take that through a life cycle and ensure basically collaboration with vendors and internal teams are kept to a premium. So they're the typical responsibilities we see from the roles. It's not exhaustive. There's quite a lot there. You might want to cut it down. You might want to add some more to it that represent your company and your needs, but it's a solid starting point in our mind. And when you put all this together, you end up with a single view of what we think a whole role profile looks like for a vendor manager of 1 to 5 years experience. We also offer a download for this, so you'll find within the link within this video, the slide I just went through, that has been put into a standard template that you will see. You can just find and replace your organisation's name and say about your go-to-market proposition. And that's a vendor manager job description for a VMO ready to go. Hope that was useful. Take a look at the other videos in this VMO, so Vendor Management Office series. Would love to get your feedback on how you think it's going, anything that's missed, or ask any questions, and we'll direct you to the content that answers your questions, or we'll create some new content for you. Thank you.
To keep up with the latest Vendor Ops news, subscribe here and follow us on LinkedIn and Twitter. Links in the description below.